back today. We're going to do a real quick video, just a basic oil change. Got a 2001 Ford Focus. And we're just going to go through what needs to be done to do an oil change and a couple of things to keep an eye on and look for when you're doing it. So one thing to note, I have this car up on ramps. Let's see, it's up on ramps. I have the parking brake engaged and I have the back tires blocked so it can't roll. Be safe when you're getting under a car. Don't trust the floor jack. Put jack stands underneath. In this case I have ramps, so just be smart about what you do and your safety concerns whenever you're under a car. So we're down under the car here. I'm looking at the oil pan here, and you can see the drain plug right here. We're going to take that drain plug off, drain the oil out of the engine first. There it goes. So we're just going to let that drain into the pan. There we go. There's the drain plug. So you can see there's a gasket on that, on the bottom here, plastic in this case. You just have to make sure they're not cracked. Some cars, Hondas, Toyotas specifically, and I'm sure there are others, you have to replace the gasket every time. They have a metal crush washer on them to seal it. Other cars have a plastic or nylon gasket. Some it's built right into the bolt. You just got to check them to make sure they're not cracked so they don't leak before you put the bolt back on there and replace it if it's necessary. So a couple things I just wanted to note. So here's the new filter, and I like synthetic oil, and this is a synthetic filter. It's an oil filter made specifically for synthetic oil. It has a higher capacity and a better filtering capacity to go extended mileage. So in this car and most of my cars that I drive, synthetic, I'll run for 8,000 miles, and this filter can easily handle that. Don't use a regular, ordinary filter if you're going to use synthetic oil and you're going to run it for a longer extended period of time. You can use them if you're not running extended mileage. If you're running 3,500 or 4,000, you're fine. But if you're going to use synthetic and you're going to extend your intervals between changing the oil, make sure you use a filter that can handle it. This is a Purolator synthetic PSL series made specifically for that. So there's one other point I wanted to make about oil change. I'm just zoom right in here. You can see on the top of that oil filter the black ring. That's a gasket for the oil filter. When you take the old filter off the engine, sometimes that gasket will stick to the engine. You have to make sure you get that off there. If you put a new filter on there and there's an existing gasket, you will leak oil all over the place. Before you put this filter on, you would put a real thin film of oil around that gasket to lubricate. One other thing when you're changing filters. Some cars, depending on the position of the filter, in this case, this car faces sideways, so I can't pre-fill the filter. If you have a filter that faces up and screws in from the bottom, you should fill that filter before you put it on. So you can pour oil right down the middle of that filter, and it will, it'll take you a couple times to do it, but you can fill that filter all the way up. All that does is it doesn't have to fill the filter when you initially start the car. It'll immediately start pumping oil to the top half of the engine. So if you can fill the filter before you put it on, fill it up with new oil. You can see it's pretty much done draining. It's just dripping a little bit. I'm going to put that oil pan drain plug back in and tighten it back up. So this is pretty much tight. We don't want to crank this down really hard. We snug it up, make sure it doesn't leak. We're going to check that afterwards. But just snug it up. It doesn't need to be brutally tight. The gasket will seal it that's on there. I'm just going to clean that up. So up here, the back of the engine, right there, is the oil filter. So we're going to reach up in there. We have an oil filter wrench. if we need it. Sometimes you get them up by hand, sometimes you need a wrench. We're going to loosen that up, and we have the drain pan still underneath here. It's going to leak out the old oil as we take it off. It's particularly since this one faces sideways, and we'll drain it, and then we'll replace it with a new one. So I'm just reaching up in there to get the filter with a filter wrench to get it loose, to get it started. Sometimes you can't get them off by hand. And the new filter, we're just going to reach up in there, put the new filter on. There's a point. You should not tighten the filter with a wrench. It doesn't need to be tightened by a wrench, just by hand. And one thing I got to check, as I mentioned earlier, but I didn't look yet, is on the old filter. We'll look at this old filter. Hopefully you can see it has the gasket on it. We want to make sure that gasket came off with the filter and it's not still on the side of the engine. We're just spinning that onto the side of the engine. And what the general rule is, you spin it down till it meets the mating surface and then 3/4 of a turn. So we're just going to turn this 3/4 of a turn here. Make sure it's tightened up by hand. That's all you need to do. Should not leak. Okay. I'm going to clean the oil off here. The mess that's dripping down on things. Can't avoid that. And that's it for underneath. We're done underneath the car. We've drained the oil, put the drain plug back in, tightened it up, changed the filter, made sure the old gasket came off with the old filter, lubricated the new gasket before we put it on the engine, and tightened it up by hand. And we're going to go up top now and add the oil. Okay, we're back up top. Drain the oil. Put a new filter on, so now we're going to refill this. This particular car, this engine takes 4.5 quarts. 4.5 quarts of oil. We're going to use Royal Purple in this case. This is 520. It says right on the cap. Usually the engine will say right on the oil fill cap what it takes. This is 520, so that's what we use. So if you remember in the beginning, the specs for this motor are 4.5 quarts. We put 4 in with the oil filter change. So we're going to put half this quart in. So that's pretty much it. We're going to take this out. We'll take it for a little bit of dry, make sure nothing leaks, and it's done. Keep records. I'll write down the mileage and when it was done and the date it was done and when it's due for the next oil change. And that's it. Pretty simple. Easy to do. You can do it yourself. One thing I will say is your old oil. I have containers for it, and then you can get your own containers. Some of the drain pans are made that you can seal them. But any place that does service, such as Pep Boys, you can take that old oil to them, and they'll recycle it for you and dispose of it properly, reuse it, clean it, filter it, do whatever they do with it. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a pretty basic, easy thing to do. if you feel like you know, you haven't done a lot, you feel like starting out doing something, it's not a bad one to start with.